Just as a reminder, this presentation is only for educational purposes. We are not intending it to be personalized guidance. Please contact us if you need to reach out on an individualized basis. This is really just for educational purposes today. As we mentioned, we are discussing the EB-2 NIW best evidence.
Just give an overview about what we're going to discuss today. Firstly, the importance of supporting evidence. What is this evidence really even supporting? We're going to go over the types of evidence that we see submitted, and also the difference between the evidentiary submissions for research-based and then also industry-based clients. And hopefully we'll have some questions at the end.
Perfect. This is an overview. If you were to submit your packet for the EB-2 NIW, this is what you could expect at a high level for evidence to look like. It will include your legal brief or petition. It will include supporting evidence, including that proposed endeavor statement. It'll also include certain forms and applicable filing fees. Remember that the reviewing officer is actually reviewing the petitioner's proposed endeavor against the NIW framework, as opposed to other visas which may weigh heavily on the petitioner's resume or CV. This is why we're taking time to talk about the importance of specific evidence for each prong or factor of the framework today, because this is a common misunderstanding among applicants, and having this shift in understanding is really essential for a successful petition, in our opinion.
Exactly. And then just take a wider look out at the USCIS evidentiary requirements. The controlling case law is the matter of Danisar that rescinded previous decisions that outline the NIW framework. So now the new standard is that USCIS may grant a national interest waiver as a matter of discretion if the petitioner demonstrates by preponderance of the evidence that their work or their proposed endeavor, I should say, has substantial merit and national importance, that the petitioner is well balanced to advance the proposed endeavor, and then finally, on balance, it would be beneficial to the United States to waive the typical labor certification requirements to let this person in. And so backing up a little bit, so preponderance of the evidence, if you're not familiar with any legal terms, that sounds a little odd, but it really means more likely than not. So I think we always describe it as a 51% standard. And then also the matter of discretion. So even if, you might have a perfect application on paper, but there's still the discretionary aspect of it. So it could be denied, just to put that out there as well. And then finally, I have another bit of case law that reliance on background information and statistics concerning various topics is generally not probative. This is more so for people who just want to submit a lot of articles about maybe their field, but it doesn't actually speak to their specific niche or maybe their work. Things like that, USCIS won't give much weight to in the filing.
Now that brings us to the first prong of the NIW framework, which is the substantial merit and national importance. What Kate just mentioned about the case law for statistical evidence really applies heavily to the substantial merit and national importance, because you may be a software engineer focusing on AI. We don't need to sell the USCIS on how important AI is for the United States. We need to sell the United States USCIS officer on how important your proposed endeavor is, focused on this niche area, and how it will impact the United States broadly and systematically. So, for example, if you were looking at evidence to leverage your proposed endeavor, we're looking specifically at its substantial merit. The parameters of your proposed endeavor would have to have merit, it would have to have national importance. So what does that mean? Is there some kind of statistic or bit of evidentiary support to show that maybe you can offset supply chain load by 30%? Is there something that shows that your method is unique in such a way that cancer treatment could be escalated or improved, 15%, 500,000 people? Give us something that has contextual parameters to help demonstrate that your proposed endeavor, not the idea of your field, is really going to be important. So what we have as examples includes this detailed personal statement or your research plan. We could show letters of recommendation given by independent experts, supervisors, it could be colleagues, it could be counterparts throughout the United States. We would value their input and their judgment of your proposed endeavor also. Also, it could be considered if you've done something similar in the past and maybe it's yielded a certain percentage of success or offset a financial burden for a certain sector. That could also be leveraged as saying, hey, you know, they've done something similar in the past. Now they're going to enhance it. So inherently, you could anticipate that the improvement would only continue to rise. Also, published articles are helpful if you are a scholarly research-based track. Also, you could consider evidence of implementation of your work. Do you have a patent? Do you have any kind of media awards? Do you have any kind of recognition that would demonstrate that they have, whether it's your organization, your city, your state, your region, do you have some kind of evidence that would prove that there has been implementation, otherwise value, to the past projects you've been a part of that are similar to the future projects you plan to prepare?
Exactly. And then going into the second prong, the well-positioned. Again, to qualify for this category, you could be somebody of advanced degree or exceptional ability, but important to know that advanced degree is not enough to show that you are well-positioned. I come across some people who think, oh, just because I have my PhD, I'm not worried about well-positioned, but that's not actually accurate. And although it's important to include evidence of your degrees, your resume, transcript, and also to have an equivalency evaluation if your highest attained degree was obtained abroad. But mostly in this well-positioning prong, we want to look at evidence that you have made some sort of impact to your field already. It seems like USCIS officers don't really see that you're at the top of the field if you haven't made some sort of innovative contribution, but that can be hard sometimes for people to show that outside of their employer. So I think if you can get the letters of recommendation that can speak to maybe an internal process that you created that, you know, trickles down through your employer. And also touching on the letters of recommendation, sometimes people want to perhaps reach out to the CEO or the highest person in their company, but that's not always the most beneficial if you've had very limited interactions with the CEO, perhaps. We want the letters to come from somebody who, you know, can speak to your work and to your contributions. I think this is a great way to show that is through the letters of recommendation. Also, perhaps for research-based petitioners, if you have evidence of funding, perhaps like NIH funding for previous research that you did, or if you have evidence of collaboration, letters of interest from certain U.S. government organizations are very helpful as well. But again, just touching back, I think the letters are a very strong piece of evidence, and we just want to show that you are doing something innovative. It doesn't necessarily have to be revolutionary, and that's not quite the standard, but to show those original contributions, I do think that's the strongest way that people get that evidence across.
The third and final prong to this NIW framework is to demonstrate that the benefit to the United States outweighs the labor certification process. So the traditional EB-2 is this labor certification process. There's the perm application, there's this entire articulation of your skill set, how it aligns to a specific role. It's very much regimented, a very much compartmentalized application process. And so the benefit to an applicant or the United States is that if we can demonstrate that you have exceptional ability, meaning skills that are not easily articulated in that traditional perm application, we can demonstrate here in this petition that you make a great candidate for the NIW National Interest Waiver. Now, how do we do that? Well, there's a few ways to do that, and evidence becomes extremely crucial for this step in the process. If you have multiple master's degrees, bachelor degrees, particularly master's or PhD degrees, or a combination thereof, leveraging those transcripts and diplomas tend to be a great way to demonstrate that you have a multifocal skill set. So sometimes we see folks who have maybe a engineering degree, and then they go on to specialize in something very specific in their PhD program, whether it's environmental engineering, electrical engineering, automotive, industrial, something like that. Contrast, you could also mix skill sets. We've seen epidemiologists who had a doctorate in their home country come here and complete an epidemiology degree. So we're able to leverage that multifocal skill set. Also, we have clients who have multiple master's degrees. So they may have something in computer software as well as an MBA or something along those lines. We can discuss how It is very challenging to articulate that combination of skills, those advanced skills, and how it may apply for multiple job categories, making it very impractical, very cumbersome, and very, very challenging for that petitioner to successfully navigate a perm application, thus making them a successful candidate for the NIW National Interest Waiver. So you can see transcripts and diplomas come into multiple factors here. It's not just a well-positioned argument. It's not just those letters of recommendation. It's not just the CV. We leverage every bit of objective evidence that we can, because we know that the USCIS officers really like objective evidence. And they like for us to really focus on what makes somebody authentic. And so this final prong is where we really lastly get to leave the USCIS with that impression of what makes someone authentic and different. We do that by leveraging their multifocal skill set, those transcripts, diplomas, independent letters, confirming or affirming things that are exceptionally profound about their contributions. What have they done to really rise and distinguish themselves amongst their peers? If they're a manager, if they're a supervisor, if they're a professor, they're in the best position to give that recommendation and give that context for us. So while letters of recommendation are not mandatory from the USCIS perspective, they're incredibly valuable and incredibly useful if you can find recommenders who are willing to go that route for you. Generic letters, are not as helpful. The USCIS does call those out as unhelpful and unprobative, but a compelling letter of recommendation that goes into very specific details about how this person has contributed or distinguished themselves is extremely valuable in multiple areas for the NIW petition. Any kind of detrimental shortage of urgency, any kind of national initiative that lists something as of paramount importance, maybe needing to happen within the next 20 years. 20 years seems like a long time to an individual, but it's not that long for a government. So those tend to be short-term goals, things that are needing to happen over the next 10 to 20 years. So anything that the government has listed, if their initiatives align to the core of that proposed endeavor, then there's also a strong urgency argument if we can find that compelling evidence as well. Lastly, any kind of metrics that you may be able to provide, again, going back to some clients are able to say, I improved my company system by 20%, and, introducing my methods, they're unique, they're innovative, and my manager confirms that. That we can reintroduce that information here. And lastly, any kind of evidence showing that you've collaborated with the government, grants, awards, any kind of certification that you may have showing that you've collaborated on projects that are closely related to your proposed endeavor would also benefit in this section. So that would be our best examples. These, we could talk about the NIW and all of its ins and outs for a long time, but today we wanted to discuss evidence, and so we've walked you through those evidence that we would leverage based on the 3 factors of the NIW framework.
Exactly. And then I think Chelsea and I both kind of differentiated these as we've discussed them, but there is sort of a difference between, let's say, like non-academic professionals. And by that, I just mean somebody who's not research-based, and then industry experts who are more research-based. For those who don't have a research background, I think they can be hesitant perhaps to pursue an NIW. I have many consultations where a client will ask me, aren't citations required? And say no. It might make it easier for the reviewing USCIS officer to see perhaps your impact and your professional network and things of that nature, but it isn't a requirement. So somebody who doesn't have a research background, their evidentiary submission will look a little different. If possible, we'd like to submit, case studies or project summaries. If there is, news articles about your work, I would say that's rare for a non-research based petitioner, but that's always useful. I think the letters of recommendation really come in very handy for those who don't have a research-based background, because you can have supervisors, you can have your colleagues who can attest to your, your original, significant contributions, because you can't rely on perhaps a Google Scholar profile or a large citation record to show your impact. The same thing, if your proposed endeavor aligns with U.S. policy goals, we want to show that. I think perhaps showing the high salary, I don't really do this, I feel like, as often with academic petitioners, but for those in an industry-based non-research based, I should say, to show evidence of a high salary, that they earn a higher salary than normal in their field, is another way to show like their exceptional ability, I think. And again, evidence of your ongoing future projects in the United States, if you can get that perhaps through an employment verification letter or a critical contribution letter. Those are the ways that petition will look a little different. Whereas those who do have a research-based petition, they can more so rely on their academic publications, patents, or maybe provisional patents. I think it's easier for them to show as well, like if they have government funding, perhaps for their lab that they work in, or perhaps their individual research. I think it's also easier to show the well positioning in a way, because most researchers, I would say, either have peer-reviewed work or actively reviewing others' work, so they can show that a little easier. So in those ways, the petitions will look a little different. The evidence, at least, I do think you can be successful on either route. I don't think that non-researchers should be hesitant to apply if you do have this innovative look for the United States.
And that leads us to some, concluding things to keep in mind here. We want to encourage you to focus on what makes you unique, what makes you and your specific skill set, in its best position. Don't try to be like everybody else. Don't try to be, don't try to pitch to the USCIS why cancer research is important. Show why your research is important. Find that value and stick to it. Working with an attorney can be very helpful. I find that clients often have a difficult time kind of praising their work in this way. And so, we can look at it and it feels like praise, and it is praise, because what you're doing is exceptional by standard and by this petition as well, right? And so keeping in mind what keeps you in the realm of exceptional ability, match your skill set to an emerging issue, because it all must be connected for a successful petition. That means using your strongest and best arguments, focusing on those and prioritizing those and strengthening the evidence around those arguments would be key in terms of focus and where to scale your effort and your focus. So keeping it simple is also important. We don't need to know about there's semiconductors, there's chips, there's all of these AI models, there's different kinds of biology clients that we work with who are chemists and doing all these amazing things. We don't want to overwhelm the USCIS officer in such a way that they disengage because it's too difficult to read. They're human. Keep that in mind. So keep it readable, keep it simple, keep it connected so that they can almost get hooked on this. They want to see it through. They want to cheer for you by the end of it. That was what we would go for. Try to build, we want to build the strongest record that we can, but we definitely don't want to take it so far that we provide way too much evidence. We have to really find that great spot where we can demonstrate to the USCIS on a preponderance of the evidence that you are exceptional ability, you're well equipped to perform this proposed endeavor, that it has substantial merit, national importance, and that there is this urgency for what you're doing. We need to show that, but we don't need to provide so much evidence that they look at this and they say, look, I've got an hour to go over this. There's no way I'm getting through 2,000 pages of support. So finding that bit of finding that bit of balance is really an art. That's where having help comes in. People come to us all the time and they say, my proposed endeavor was approved in terms of the substantial merit, national importance, and yet my well position fell out. I have all these degrees. Why did that happen? And so, it just goes to show you that you can't build a successful petition without all the parts. Converse, clients come to us and they say, I've self-petitioned and I can't show national importance, but what I'm doing should be aligned. Well, it is probably, but maybe you didn't focus on the areas that really show how exceptional your future plans are. You didn't focus on the areas to show evidence that gives a broader impact, which is something that the USCIS happens to be focusing on right now. So just keep in mind, there is a strategy, there is a plan, and with that kind of framework in mind, hopefully this evidentiary support discussion today is very helpful to you and helps you think about your petition or your future petition in a way that provides you with a pathway to success and just confidence in what you're submitting.
And thinking again about your future submission, perhaps. Some next steps we've created just to conclude this PowerPoint. First, again, the letters of recommendation, I feel like I can't stress enough, but start thinking about who you can ask. Again, people who know you best are, I think, the first people that you should ask, perhaps colleagues, supervisors, anyone you've co-authored an article with, professors, people who supervised you personally, but also if you can have an independent expert, if you've met somebody at a conference perhaps, or if you're connected with somebody on LinkedIn and you're willing to share what your proposed work or research is in the United States to have their opinion, I think that's also very beneficial. And then secondly, to start articulating why you have that advanced skills or why your work is urgent. I think if you can't do that, you might need to rethink what you're doing just a little bit if you should be able to explain it. You want to make sure that the argument is strong. And then finally, to get in touch with an immigration attorney to file your petition. We've kept, this discussion today pretty broad, but every case is so unique and there is a different strategy to apply to each one. So I really can't stress that enough, that to give your case, I think the highest chance of approval, you should be in contact with an immigration attorney. And if anyone has any questions in the chat, I think we'd like to take some time to address them.